Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24. In this video I'm going to take a look at a game played by world champion Magnus Carlsen against Grandmaster Wesley. So they played each other in the Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis. Magnus Carlsen, here we see him against Wesley. So had a bit of a rocky start into the tournament, lost the first round to Wesley Topalov, but has come back strongly, scored 2.5 out of 3 after that, and is close to the lead after four rounds, looking to score a next win in the 5th one. His opponent Wesley So on -1 after 4 games was at the wrong end of a masterpiece in the round prior to this one where he lost to Levon Aronian. Check out my video on that game as well. And let's get started with this one. The world champion with the white pieces goes for 1e4. His main move, Wesley So plays c5 the Sicilian, so a great theoretician, can play c5, can play e5, but decided to play the Sicilian for this game, and probably he did have a look at Magnus Carlsen's first round game, where Magnus Carlsen played bishop b5 check, the move he prefers in this position, but ended up being surprised and losing to Wesley Topalov after knight d7. He did not get anything out of the opening and was struggling quite soon. So most likely So had considered this in his preparation, and Magnus Carlsen decided to change tunes a bit, play the move d4 here, the open Sicilian, which we haven't seen that much from him. d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, the Najdorf. This is the Sicilian version that is most popular at the top level. Never-ending question what to do here with white. Carlsen goes for bishop e3. This used to be the absolute main line a couple of years back. The white plan is to play f3, queen d2, long castles, g4, so-called English attack. Lost a little bit of popularity recently. My theory is that it's mainly because of the move knight to g4. Here after bishop g5, h6. Bishop h4, g5. Black has been doing alright, and white players have started to look elsewhere. We've seen a lot of games with h3 here. Vishianen played bishop e2 in this tournament. So bishop e3 has some competition, but Carlsen chose it for this game, and Wesley So did not go knight to g4, but one of the other main moves, he played e5. In a way, the most pure Najdorf move, prepared by a6. You take this square under control, and then you follow it up with e5. The drawback, of course, is that it's weakening the d5 square. This is going to play a role in this game. The advantage is that it kicks the knight out of the center and claims some space. Knight b3, bishop e6, f3. All of this is mainline theory, intending the typical plan queen d2, long castles, g4. Knight bd7, also well known, queen d2 and b5. Black is starting to organize his counterplay on the queen side, can't sit around and wait for white to do anything. And with b5 he's preparing to play b4, kick the white knight away from the center or force it to go to d5. And he's also establishing a nice square for his own knight on b6 from where it can jump to c4. Long castles, bishop e7, g4. All of this is still well known. Lots of Grandmaster games from this position. Here the main move is castles, which can lead to some very fascinating stuff after g4, b4. How does this line go? Knight e2, knight e8, and f4. This is a, very, very interesting line. a5, f4, a4, and all hell breaks loose. I think the main line is something like knight bd4, ed, knight d4. Don't ask me for the current state of theory. I don't know, but I do think that Magnus Carlsen was well prepared for this and had an idea somewhere here. Wesley So, however, decides to deviate, play another move that is slightly less established, but also very principled. He plays b4, kicking the white knight away from c3 before white gets in g5. Carlsen jumps into the center, goes knight d5. This is the best move. Knight to a4 doesn't make a lot of sense since this square is well covered and the knight would just be out of play. So knight d5, black has to take it, can't tolerate this knight here. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, not the best of ideas because this bishop would be trapped. So you have to go bishop takes d5. E takes d5. Now white is once again threatening to kick this knight away with g5. So black has to react quickly, goes knight b6, attacking the pawn on d5. Here, white has tried different things. The most obvious move is probably queen takes b4, but practice has shown that black is alright. After knight fd5, bishop b6, knight b6, there were some games. I think there was a game Morozevich against Lenier Dominguez. Lenier Dominguez, the Cuban, one of the biggest experts in the Najdorf, and he held himself comfortably here. Carlsen does have other plans. The move he plays, it's a very nice looking move, knight to a5. The way he handles it, it was going to involve a long-term sacrifice, and it's the start of a strategic plan. Knight a5 is a very interesting square for the knight. It can jump to c6, can jump to c4, and in some lines it can even jump to b7. For example, if black were to play knight f takes d5, looks logical enough, white has a very strong knight b7. Queen d7, bishop takes b6, knight takes b6, and knight takes d6 check. The resulting endgame would be seriously better for white. So what you have to do, and what so does, is take with the other knight, knight bd5, now white has to take a decision. Well, he doesn't have to take a decision if he's prepared for this, and it is all theory, so I will assume that Magnus Carlsen was still very much in book here. Knight c6 is the most obvious move. This has been played, but after queen c7, knight b4, knight takes, queen takes, and short castles, practice has shown that black is alright. He can put his rooks on b8 and c8, and the white king is a little too exposed to be comfortable with both these files open in front of him. So this does not look too scary. I think our friend Peter Svidler had a game in this position against Sergei Karyakin, which he went on to lose with white. Therefore, fashion has moved to the move knight to c4. Very slow move, so you might ask yourself, what's the idea? The idea is kind of simple. You want to recapture on e3 with a knight, but the long-term concept behind it is quite deep. White wants to gain control over the light squares in the center, chase this knight away, and then, put his knight on d5 or his bishop on c4, control the light squares, and just play this position. He's not concerned about being a pawn down. And this is how the game continues. Knight takes e3, knight takes e3, short castles, bishop to c4 was played, and only this move is a novelty. I believe it's actually not a good novelty. I'll tell you why in a second. Queen takes b4 should not even be considered. This only helps black. He could get in d5 and d4 now, and the b file would be open. This would not be in line with white's plan at all. I believe the best move is the move already played here, to just play h4, then prepare g5, and down the line put your bishop on c4. Carlsen started with bishop c4, and I do think that this is inaccurate because Wesley So had the chance to return his pawn here immediately with the move d5. Free his game, give the pawn back, and I couldn't find anything for white here. If bishop takes d5, knight takes d5. The problem is knight takes d5 runs into bishop g5, which is very unpleasant, so you don't want to do this. And if queen takes d5, there's also bishop g5, so this is no good for white. Instead, what he probably has to do is go knight takes d5, knight takes d5. Once again, you can't take with the bishop because you would lose your queen, so you have to play queen takes d5. And this position after queen c7 does look quite equal to me. Black has managed to gain some space for his bishop. He can follow up with rook d8, exchange rooks down the d file, and I don't think there's any problems for black. However, So probably didn't see any problems in the current position anyway. He is a pawn up and white doesn't have any immediate threats, so he decided to play more slowly. But I don't like this decision. I think practically this is a mistake and that the white position is much easier to play after it. When knight d7, Carlsen now he played h4, very useful move, taking the g5 square under control, preparing to grab more space with g5. And that's the beauty of the white concept. He's not in a particular hurry, he just wants to strengthen his position and exploit the fact that there's opposite colored bishops on the board. Which here in a middle game situation does not mean the position is drawish at all. It just means that the side that gains an initiative and can build an attack first has an extra piece in this attack, because it's very hard for a bishop to change diagonals, if not impossible, so the light squares can't be challenged by the black bishop. Therefore, I do think this position is easier to play for white with his grip on the light squares. But objectively, the computers are happy with black, and it's very possible that black can play such a position. It does strike me as hard though. a5, logical move, preparing, well, not only defending this pawn, but also preparing to open up the queen side. g5, part of the plan, not only grabbing some more space, but in some lines also introducing ideas of g6, h takes g, and h5 to open up the king side. Rook to c8 and bishop to d5. This might look a little strange, but only one of the white pieces can be on d5. And Carlsen correctly chooses the bishop here. If it ever gets exchanged, it will be replaced by a very powerful knight. And in the meantime, the bishop controls a lot of space on the board, and black finds it very hard to challenge this construction. Knight b6 was played. What else? King to b1. Always a useful move in any kind of Sicilian with opposite castles. The king vacates this diagonal, it vacates the c-file. It is a move that has to be played. Some people say it's called long castles because you need the extra move king to b1. Queen c7, fair enough. And rook hf1. This, to my mind, is a star move. It's not the move that would have occurred to me first, but I do really like it. I was thinking more along the lines of, let's try to checkmate, go something g6, h takes g, h5. Doesn't really work yet. Black keeps the position close, goes g5, h6, g6, and white hasn't accomplished anything. So you can't do that. Then there is a very sneaky move, which I quite like. It's the move queen to d3, preparing this idea. Because the point is, black goes a4, let's say. Now g6 is very strong. H takes g, h5, g5, h6. And the difference is, here black cannot go g6 because of queen takes g6. And believe it or not, it's checkmate next move. This is not a legal move. So queen d3 was very interesting, but you could argue it would have been a distraction from the main plan. The computer gives king h8 and doesn't see anything too bad happening to black. So Carlsen played the move rook hf1, and this, in a way, it's a whole philosophy to chess. He is happy with what he's achieved, and now he's thinking, which of my pieces aren't really contributing yet? And he decided this rook on h1 can do better, so he goes rook f1, preparing the move f4, which would put black in a bit of a dilemma. You can't allow this pawn to advance any further, so you would have probably to take it, but if you take it, then the rook comes to f4 and enters the game with tremendous strength. So Carlsen is following this rule, invite everyone to the party before you really start attacking. I was quite impressed with this move. So takes on d5. I believe this is the correct decision. You have to get rid of the light square bishop. However, it is replaced by this knight, which is also quite a powerhouse on d5. Queen to b7 and f4. That was the plan. Knight e7, queen e7, queen d6 is of course not what white was opting for in this endgame after takes. Let's say f6. Black would be perfectly fine, and white should not cash in that early just to regain his pawn. f4 is much stronger. Threatening f5, so once again reacts correctly, goes f5 himself, stopping this pawn on f4, and prepares to grab some space, create a passed pawn in the center with e4. Still, he has to deal with this dominating knight on d5 and his passive bishop, so white at the very least has full compensation for his pawn here. I'm not sure if you could or should argue that he's much better already. However, I would argue that his position is much easier to play. e4 is forced, keeping the position closed, and Carlsen once again is looking for small improvements, finds them in h5. He's intending to advance his pawn to h6, which is always very unpleasant for black. We'll see it after a couple moves. Rook to c5, h6. Small tactical point here. Black cannot take on d5 because of queen b3, and the pin would win material. So you have to react to this pawn on h6. You can't really allow hg7, exposing the black king. Black has to play g6, but now we see this thorn in the flesh is very, very unpleasant to deal with. There's always ideas of queen d4, queen g7, checkmate, and of course So is not going to allow that. But this pawn is just such a nuisance. Whenever there's something happening on the king side, even many endings. If white gets a hold of this h7 pawn, the h6 pawn will be so far advanced that it's going to be very hard to deal with. Knight f6 check, knight takes h7 is something we often see. Whenever the position opens up here, this construction is going to be a huge headache for black. Still, he had no choice, and he's defended correctly. Queen b3 now, threatening a little discover check. Not going to happen. Rook f7 and a4. This is another star move. The computer doesn't like it. The computer gives something like a3, trying to win a pawn here, which might also be good, but I really like a4 because it's in line with the overall strategy. It stops black counterplay. Black can no longer think about going a4 himself and trying to open up the queen side. And once again, like putting the pawn on h6, it's also establishing some trumps for the endgame. Let's say the position opens up and white manages to win the a5 pawn. For example, the rook comes to d5 and takes this pawn. Then having the pawn on a4 is a tremendous asset because all of a sudden would be a passed pawn, which could be very fast. And also a4 reinforces the light square control. You could even think of some endgames where the white king marches in on these light squares and captures the a5 pawn. So Carlsen, even though he's a pawn down, he hasn't been worried about winning it back the slightest. He's just quietly improved his position, bishop d8, and now he once again does the same thing, goes rook to d4, thinking this rook has done its job on f1, it's time to put it to d1, and then start putting pressure on the d6 pawn. King to f8, stepping out of this very nasty diagonal, rook fd1. Now everything is more or less optimized, and it's time to start concrete operations with knight e3, knight c4. Once again, the computer does not give an edge for white here, and it's very possible the computer can defend this position, but over the board I just find it very, very hard for black to play because black doesn't really have any active ideas. He can only anticipate what white is going to do. So goes rook c6. Computer is not fond of this move. Wants to defend with rook d7, if knight e3, bishop e7. But this also does not look like a picnic. The knight can still come to c4. And for black, it's just very, very hard to play. Still, rook c6 was played. And now Carlsen goes for knight e3. Can't improve the position further. So it's time for this knight to leave its beautiful post to start chasing some material. Bishop to b6, so seizes the chance to activate his bishop, which has been passive for a long time. Does not want to defend passively here. Bishop c7. You have to think about all kinds of nasty ideas. Queen e6, for example, would be unpleasant to deal with. It's possible black still survives, but it's certainly no fun. Bishop b6, very natural reaction. Note that we're also entering time trouble here, move 32. There's no increment in this tournament. Both players low on time have to make the 40 move mark. After bishop b6, Carlsen goes for a little tactic, which I was gonna praise because it's a very cute solution. However, the computer does disagree and gives the much more direct and more brutal move rook takes d6. After rook d6, well, champion did not go for this because of bishop c7, but here the computer spits out some beautiful lines that do lead to a huge white advantage, if not a win. Rook e6, bishop takes f4, knight to d5, bishop takes g5. Normally over the board here you would stop calculating. You've lost 2 pawns, h6 is folding, there's nothing immediate. But the computer shows that after rook b6 the white pieces are so active that black can't defend. I'll show you the line here, the key line, because it's very pretty. Queen a8, queen c4, once again increasing the activity. Bishop takes h6 and knight to c7. And believe it or not, this queen is going to be lost. Doesn't have anywhere to go. Queen d8 or queen c8 both run into knight e6 check, winning the queen. Rook c7, queen c7 certainly doesn't help. So the only logical move is queen a7. The tactics aren't over. Queen c5 check, capitalizing on the fact that this queen is undefended. Black king has to go to g8 or g7. Now rook takes g6, followed by queen takes a7, picks up the queen. So good luck calculating all this stuff from this position. Magnus Carlsen didn't do it. He did play the move knight c4 instead, which is very spectacular as well. going for some tactical details. In the game, his decision was justified by bishop takes d4 after knight a5, queen b6, knight c6. White won his pawn back with a very good position. We'll get to that in a minute. But both players missed a little detail here, which I'm not sure would have changed the course of the game that much, but it was a very good chance. Rook takes c4. Giving up the exchange, or so it looks like, but the very cute point is that after rook takes c4, you will notice this rook doesn't really have anywhere to go, and it can be attacked with d5. d5 immediately doesn't work yet, because if rook takes d5, and after queen d5, there's a discovered check, rook c8 check, picking up the queen. So you can't do that, but what you can do is another very, very powerful computer move. Just play rook d7, prepare this d5. It turns out that there's nothing white can do about it, and d5 would come next move, solving all of black's problems. So what white has to do is to take with the queen on c4 instead. Don't even try to win the exchange. Then bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, or rook takes d4, both possible. And I'd still take white. He's gonna, at the very least, win this pawn back due to his activity. But this would have eased black's defenses a bit, that he got rid of his bishop for the powerful white knight. And after queen c7, let's say, if white doesn't have anything better than queen d6, rook d6, this looks like black should have very fair drawing chances. Wesley so missed this, and he went for bishop takes d4, knight takes a5, queen b6, knight takes c6, bishop c5. Now after queen d5, the position remains complicated. White has to find a way to get his knight out of enemy territory or put it to good use on c6. But he did win his pawn back, and he did create this passed pawn. Once again, we see the value of playing a4 earlier. So objectively, this does favor white. Black played e3. Carlsen mentioned later that he felt he got very lucky here because he was very afraid of the move queen to b7, pinning this knight, and it took him forever, or so he said, to spot yet another nice little trick here. Queen takes c5. The point is after dc5, rook d8 is checkmate, a very unusual back rank checkmate. Knight controls the e7 square and the h6 pawn, the g7 square. So queen b7 was not valid, but it did give Magnus Carlsen a little scare. e3 is more logical, getting the own passed pawn to run a5 and queen to b5. Computer gives queen c7, but also dislikes it after a6. So queen b5, once again a more logical move, trying to support the pawn. Here, both players low on time. Carlsen plays a very strong move on move 38, the move knight to d8, trying to find work for this knight. I'm curious if he calculated everything after the move rook e7 here, which looks very logical, once again trying to support this pawn. And white has a very strong knight maneuver, a little dance here, knight e6 check, king e8 forced, knight to d4, queen b7, and knight to c6. The knight just did a little tour of the board, knight d8, knight e6, knight d4, and returns to c6. But now it does all work out for white because the g8 square has been cleared thanks to this little knight dance. And in this position, white is winning. Even this is by no means trivial. e2, rook e1, rook e4, for example. The key move is a6, and if queen takes a6, queen g8 check picks up the queen. Queen d7, knight b8 check. This knight would conclude his quite impressive career by eating the black queen. I don't know, maybe both players saw this. At the very least, Wesley so decided to avoid this line and went rook to a7 instead. Also a logical move. He's hoping to generate some counterplay by going queen takes a5, all of a sudden threatening queen a1 checkmate. For now it's white to move. He goes knight e6 check, king to e8, and this is the dreaded move 40. Up to here I think we've seen a strategic masterpiece by Magnus Carlsen. The conception in the opening, not the conception, the idea, and yeah, moves like a4, rook f1, f4, h5, h6, all very good stuff. But here on move 40 he missed a way to wrap up the game by going knight takes c5, probably couldn't part ways with his very strong knight, which would have been decisive. The point is after queen c5, queen g8 check, king d7, queen h7 check. Note that now white managed to create passed pawns out of both his pawns he advanced earlier, king c6, queen takes g6, and the last tactical point is that e2 does not work because of queen e8 check, picking up the pawn, so this position would just be winning for white. Queen takes a5, might look scary, but it comes a little late because it's white move again. Queen takes d6, wins. But Carlsen missed that chance and went knight d4 instead. Maybe this move knight d4 was still stuck in his head from the line with rook e7, where this was the decisive move. However, now after queen takes a5, black has some counterplay, threatening queen a1 checkmate, and there's no direct win apparent. Good news for the world champion is now they did both make the time control. It's move 41, so Carlsen could take all the time in the world to calculate the lines, which is what he did, and he realized, he said, if I'm not worse here, I'm probably still much better. He calculated everything and came up with the strongest way to play. Queen g8 check, king d7. Queen takes h7 check. King to c8. Now there's no time to pick up the pawn on g6 because of queen a1 checkmate. But white can give another check. Queen g8 check, king b7. And now create some space for his king. The only winning move in this position, the move c3, clearing the c2 square for his king. And it turns out that white is indeed still winning. Black does not have enough counterplay, his king is still loose, and there's this h-passed pawn to deal with. So when b takes c3, what else? Creating a new threat of queen a1 and queen takes b2 check. The white queen keeps doing good work, goes queen b3 check, forcing black to exchange queens, which I'm sure he wasn't happy with, but there's no choice. If king c8, knight c6 is a very nasty double attack. Queen a1 check, king c2 would not help. Similar things can be said about king c7, knight b5. Or let's say bishop b6 also runs into, well, actually now there's a couple of winning moves, h7 being one of them. None of this works. Queen b6 therefore the only chance, but this allowed Carlsen to enter an endgame where he has this tremendously strong pawn on h6. He went queen takes b6 check and took some time to study the position. Let's have a look at a little video. Here we see the world champion standing there after playing queen takes b6 check, probably calculating the ending. I hate it when they do that. Don't you hate it when your opponent stands there and looks at the board while you're suffering, calculating the lines? However, he does look confident and certainly can't blame him. There he is, leaving the board. Wesley so went on to recapture. King takes b6, b takes c3. Still not easy, but Carlsen had correctly worked out that his passed pawn is much stronger than the black passed pawn. One key line is after bishop takes d4, rook takes d4. e2 doesn't work since white has rook takes d6 check, king somewhere, and rook e6 controlling the black passed pawn. Therefore black has to defend his d6 pawn first, go king c6. But now the white king is in time to deal with this passed pawn that black has. King c2, if e2, king d2, no problem. Rook a2 check, king d1. Very important not to go king d3 because now e2 would be quite painful. The pawn can't be stopped. No such thing after king d1, e2, just king e1. Here it turns out, yeah, the black passed pawn is not very dangerous, the white is, and black is just losing. So fought on for a bit, rook f2, king e1. King to d7, rook to a4. That's another plus of the king controlling the black passed pawn. The rook is free to do other business, support his h6 pawn, pick up the g6 pawn. The position is just hopeless for black. King e6, rook a8, threatening h7, followed by h8 now. So black can no longer wait for h7, then go rook h2. He has to play rook h2, putting his rook on a passive square. And Carlsen relentlessly follows up with the move c4, stopping black from going king d5 and from going d5. It turns out that black has very few moves available that don't hurt his position. The first move you think of is the move b5, but that runs into a little tactic. h7, rook takes h7, And rook a6 check. Forcing the king onto the 7th rank, it has to go to f7, so that after rook a7 check you can go king g8. But it turns out that here rook takes h7, king takes h7, c5 is winning, and this pawn can't be stopped. Note that cd5 is also winning actually, but here it could be stopped with king g7, but after c5 white just gets a new queen. d5 therefore didn't work, so had to wait passively with king f7, but Carlsen had caught on that black doesn't have a lot of useful moves, played rook to b8, and saying, your move, please improve your position or try not to hurt it. Can't do it, it's Zukswan. If the black rook moves anywhere along the h file, then white just goes king e2, says your move again. If you move your rook again, I'll pick up your e3 pawn and then bring my king. So you can't move the rook. You can't move the d pawn anymore because of cd5. You have to move the king. The problem is, after king e6, you vacate the g8 square, and Carlsen did play rook g8, which pretty much ends the game because he picks up the g6 pawn. Rook e7 was another way to win, putting black in Zukswan. But rook g8 is more than good enough, and Wesley so decided to resign here. For example, king f7, rook g7, king e6, rook g6, and there's just not much to play for anymore. These pawns will queen. So resigned, and the game ends with a victory for the world champion Magnus Carlsen. I'm impressed with this game. It's one of those where it's very hard to say where did black go wrong, what was his mistake. The only one spot here which really stood out to me is that I believe after bishop c4 you should return this pawn with d5. Then later on it was basically a masterclass in positional play by Magnus Carlsen. I was very impressed with the move rook h1, this, preparing f4. I thought that was a very strong move. I thought the plan of going h5 and h6, okay, it's an obvious plan, but it's still very impressive to how he slightly improves his position. And I really like the move a4 as well on move 29. Very good game by the world champion, keeping control and defeating a very dangerous opponent in Wesley. So let's to wrap up, no, not look at this again, but look at the table where we can see that after 5 rounds Magnus Carlsen has caught up with the leader Levon Aronian, both on 3.5 out of 5, facing each other in the 6th round of the Sinquefield Cup. So the tournament is gonna stay exciting. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you on Chess24 to follow the tournament or play chess or do whatever you like. Thanks for watching. See you then. Bye bye.